James Carter, a highly accomplished CEO who never forgot his humble beginnings on Southside Chicago, demonstrated that success does not erase the struggles of the past. Despite managing a massive company and handling the pressures of high-level financial responsibilities, he remained deeply aware of the challenges faced by everyday people. Motivated by a personal motto instilled by his father, to work 10 times harder than others, James decided to experience firsthand the treatment that ordinary customers received at one of his bank's branches. Ditching the formal suit and polished image of a typical executive, he donned a worn leather jacket and faded jeans to blend in, determined to uncover any injustice hidden behind the pristine marble counters. Upon entering the branch, the stark, cold atmosphere immediately set him on edge. The staff, particularly a mid-30s employee named Mike, greeted him with a dismissive attitude, their expressions betraying an underlying suspicion. When James requested to withdraw $5,000 instead of a seamless transaction, he was met with bureaucratic delays and unfounded inquiries regarding his identity and the legitimacy of his funds. This encounter struck a chord with him, evoking memories of the discrimination he had long fought against. Fueled by a righteous indignation, James confronted Mike's demeaning behavior, threatening to escalate the issue to corporate headquarters if necessary. Ultimately, James revealed his true identity as the bank's owner, demanding accountability by ordering a thorough audit of the branch and immediate dismissal of any employee responsible for such treatment. His actions underscored the unwavering commitment to fairness and respect for every customer. By stepping out of his boardroom comfort zone and challenging established practices, James not only reclaimed his right to dignity but also set a powerful precedent for ethical conduct across the organization, ensuring that every individual who walks through those doors is treated with the respect they deserve. James Carter's decision to go undercover was not merely a spontaneous act of rebellion against corporate norms. It was a deeply calculated maneuver born out of his genuine desire to understand the real-life experiences of his bank's customers. Growing up in the unforgiving environment of Southside Chicago, where every day was a struggle for dignity and respect, James internalized the harsh lessons of discrimination and inequality early on. His father's relentless work ethic and stern advice to be 10 times better than those around him had instilled in him a determination to overcome adversity, but it also made him profoundly aware of how societal systems could dehumanize even the most resilient individuals. As CEO of a major bank, James found himself increasingly disconnected from the day-to-day realities that his customers faced. A disconnection that he felt could not be remedied through boardroom meetings or policy memos alone. To bridge this gap, he resolved to strip away the layers of privilege and authority that had insulated him from the challenges his clients experienced, and so he devised a plan to disguise himself and experience the bank's operations from the ground up. Dressed in a worn leather jacket and a pair of faded jeans, far removed from the sharp suits and polished shoes typical of a corporate leader, James deliberately chose an unassuming appearance to blend in with the everyday clientele. His goal was simple yet profound: to observe, interact, and understand how the bank treated its customers when the individual behind the transaction was not recognized as the powerful owner. As he entered one of the bank's branches, an establishment with an immaculate exterior that belied the underlying issues of customer mistreatment, he immediately noticed a stark contrast between the building's polished look and the chilly, indifferent atmosphere within. The spacious, marble-floored lobby, usually a symbol of prestige, instead exuded a coldness that suggested a detachment from the human element of banking. Customers sat in long lines, their faces etched with a mix of frustration and resignation, while the staff, largely composed of individuals who appeared to adhere strictly to corporate protocols, offered little more than perfunctory greetings. James's presence did not go unnoticed by everyone, however. One employee in particular, a mid-30s man named Mike, seemed to fixate on him with a suspicious air that hinted at an underlying bias. When James casually requested to withdraw $5,000 from his account, Mike's reaction was not one of routine customer service, but of incredulity and barely veiled disdain. Rather than processing the transaction promptly, Mike began a drawn-out interrogation, demanding identification and additional documentation, as if questioning the legitimacy of James's request. This excessive scrutiny was not a matter of standard procedure. It was a clear manifestation of a mindset that treated certain customers as potential risks rather than valued clients. For James, this encounter was a stark reminder of the systemic challenges faced by those who come from less privileged backgrounds. A reminder that even a successful CEO could not escape the prejudices embedded within the institution he had built. As the minutes dragged on, with Mike's actions growing increasingly defensive and patronizing, James's initial calm began to give way to a simmering resolve. He recognized that the bureaucratic delays and unfounded suspicions were not isolated incidents but symptoms of a broader culture that devalued the dignity of the customer. With a steady yet determined tone, he challenged Mike's insistence on the need for further documentation, his voice laced with both authority and the weight of personal experience. In that moment, James was not merely demanding the fulfillment of a financial transaction, he was calling out a system that allowed policies to be wielded as tools of exclusion and discrimination. His words, measured yet piercing, exposed the inherent flaw in a system that prioritized procedural formalities over genuine human connection. The confrontation escalated as James continued to press for fairness, his demeanor a blend of corporate authority and the raw, unfiltered emotion of someone who had long battled injustice. Other customers in the branch, initially passive observers, began to sense the gravity of the situation. Their eyes shifted from the indifferent employees to James, whose impassioned rhetoric resonated deeply with their own unspoken grievances. In a decisive move that would soon send ripples through the organization, James revealed his true identity as the bank's owner, a revelation that transformed the atmosphere in the branch from one of tension to shock and introspection. The unveiling was not a mere act of bravado. It was a strategic declaration that the bank's practices were now subject to the scrutiny of someone who had experienced both sides of the transaction. Once his identity was known, James laid out a clear and uncompromising mandate. The branch's policies and procedures would be thoroughly audited, and any employee found guilty of perpetuating discriminatory practices would face immediate dismissal. More importantly, he called for a comprehensive review of customer complaints and an overhaul of the training programs designed to foster empathy and fairness among the staff. Through this bold act, James sought to instill a culture of accountability and respect, principles that were essential not only for the well-being of the customers but also for the integrity of the institution itself. His message was unambiguous. The bank was no longer a faceless entity governed solely by cold, bureaucratic policies. It was a community that valued every individual who walked through its doors. By choosing to go undercover, James Carter did more than simply experience a day in the life of a regular customer. He embarked on a journey of rediscovery, one that reaffirmed his commitment to fairness and the importance of understanding the human side of business. His actions underscored the critical need for leaders to remain connected to the realities of those they serve, ensuring that the pursuit of profit never comes at the expense of human dignity. In doing so, James set a powerful precedent for ethical leadership, one where empathy, accountability, and respect formed the cornerstone of every interaction. His undercover mission was a transformative experience, not only for him but for the entire organization, as it forced everyone to confront the uncomfortable truths about their practices and motivated them to strive for a future where every customer was treated with the care and respect they deserved. In the narrative, the bank branch becomes a microcosm where disrespectful attitudes and overt discrimination are laid bare, revealing deep-seated biases that permeate customer service practices. From the moment James Carter, disguised in plain clothes, stepped into the branch, it was clear that the institution's polished exterior masked a troubling undercurrent of indifference and prejudice. The cold reception he received was not just a fleeting lapse in customer service, it was a deliberate display of how individuals who do not fit a preconceived profile are treated as lesser, undeserving of respect. The ambience of the branch, with its sleek marble floors and modern counters, belied the discomfort and tension simmering beneath the surface. As customers waited in long, unengaging queues, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of resignation and frustration, a sentiment born out of repeated experiences with staff who appeared more interested in following rigid protocols than in acknowledging their clientele as individuals. At the heart of this discriminatory environment was Mike, a mid-30s employee whose behavior epitomized the branch's biased culture. When James requested a withdrawal of $5,000, Mike's reaction was far from the routine process one would expect from a bank employee. Instead of processing the transaction promptly, Mike subjected James to an interrogation-like scrutiny, questioning his identity and the legitimacy of his funds. This excessive suspicion was not merely a function of standard security procedures, it was a manifestation of an underlying assumption that someone like James, despite his credentials, might be unworthy or untrustworthy. Mike's tone, laced with condescension and barely concealed disdain, underscored the broader issue. In this branch, policies were being wielded not as tools for safety or efficiency, but as instruments of exclusion and discrimination. His deliberate slowness, the repeated requests for documentation, and his smug, dismissive attitude all contributed to an environment where the customer was not seen as a valued individual but as a potential problem to be managed with bureaucratic rigidity. The discriminatory attitude extended beyond mere procedural delays. It was evident in the way Mike and his colleagues treated customers with an air of superiority, implicitly suggesting that those who did not conform to a particular image were less deserving of the bank's full respect. The subtle yet unmistakable signals, raised eyebrows, dismissive glances, and the palpable tension in the room served as constant reminders to customers that they were being judged, not by their financial status or loyalty, but by superficial markers that dictated their perceived worthiness. This behavior was not isolated, it was symptomatic of a systemic issue where institutional policies, instead of protecting customers, reinforced societal prejudices. The narrative paints a picture of an institution that, while outwardly modern and efficient, is riddled with practices that ultimately dehumanize and marginalize those who are deemed other. For James, who had risen from a background steeped in struggle and discrimination, the experience was a visceral reminder of the very barriers he had fought so hard to overcome. Every moment of unnecessary delay, every insinuation of mistrust, resonated with his personal history, a history where he was constantly reminded of the limits imposed on him by a society that equated his background with inferiority. The phrase legitimate funds that Mike used as if questioning James's very existence cut deep, symbolizing the internalized judgment that so many marginalized individuals have endured. In that charged moment, James's calm exterior belied a boiling determination to challenge not just the employee's behavior, but the entire discriminatory framework that allowed such conduct to persist unchecked. The narrative takes a decisive turn when James, no longer willing to accept the injustice, confronts the branch's discriminatory practices head-on. His challenge to Mike is not merely a demand for a smooth transaction, it is an indictment of a system that privileges form over fairness. By exposing the absurdity of questioning a customer's legitimacy based solely on an appearance that did not match the conventional image of a bank patron, James forces the branch to confront its own biases. His confrontation is a rallying cry for accountability. It is a demand that every customer, regardless of their background, should be treated with inherent dignity and respect. In doing so, James transforms a routine banking transaction into a powerful act of resistance against systemic discrimination. Moreover, the reaction of the other customers in the branch reinforces the pervasive nature of this discriminatory practice. Their silent observations, whispered comments, and palpable relief at seeing someone challenge the status quo reveal a collective experience of marginalization. It is a shared acknowledgement that these attitudes are not confined to one individual employee but are emblematic of a larger, institutional malaise. This moment of confrontation becomes a catalyst for change, a public demonstration that disrespect and discrimination will no longer be tolerated. Ultimately, the narrative of James Carter's undercover experience is a potent reminder that discrimination in customer service is not an isolated incident. It is an ingrained issue that requires bold leadership and systemic reform. The bank's inability to recognize a valued customer's worth based on anything other than preconceived notions reflects a broader societal problem. Through his courageous act of confronting these prejudices, James not only reclaimed his own dignity but also set a powerful precedent for transforming an institution marred by bias into one that champions fairness, respect, and equality. His actions speak to a larger truth, that every individual deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of appearance or background, and that it is the responsibility of those in power to ensure that such values are upheld in every interaction. In a moment that would soon ripple through the entire organization, James Carter's confrontation at the bank branch evolved into a defining stand for fairness and accountability. As the scene unfolded, what began as a simple attempt to withdraw money transformed into a powerful demonstration of the lengths to which one man would go to secure not only his own dignity, but that of every customer who had ever felt marginalized by an indifferent system. Standing at the counter, facing Mike, the employee whose dismissive demeanor and undue suspicion had become emblematic of the branch's problematic practices, James's calm resolve hardened into a fierce determination. His voice, steady yet brimming with underlying passion, cut through the ambient murmur of the waiting customers, demanding answers and, more importantly, insisting on rectifying an injustice that had been allowed to fester for far too long. With a measured tone that belied the storm raging within, he challenged the very policies that had permitted such treatment. "I asked for my money, not an interrogation," he declared, each word echoing with the weight of his personal journey from hardship to success. The confrontation was not merely a clash of personalities, it was a repudiation of a system built on bureaucratic indifference and the subtle art of dehumanization. For years, the branch had operated under a veneer of professionalism that, in reality, masked a deep-seated prejudice. A prejudice that questioned the legitimacy of a customer's identity based solely on superficial appearances. Mike's repeated insistence on additional documentation, his tone dripping with condescension as he reiterated that the bank needed to verify the fund's legitimacy, struck a nerve in James. Here was a man who had fought tooth and nail to rise above his humble beginnings, who had faced discrimination head-on, now being treated as if his very identity was suspect. The casual cruelty of questioning a man's right to access his own money served as a stark reminder of the systemic biases that still plagued modern institutions. Emboldened by his own history and a deep sense of responsibility toward every customer who had ever felt diminished by such behavior, James pressed on. His next words were not a mere demand for compliance, but a clarion call for systemic reform. "I expect you to process my withdrawal immediately, or I will escalate this to corporate," he warned, his tone leaving no room for ambiguity. In that tense moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The customers, who had long endured the subtle indignities of a system that saw them as mere numbers, found in James's stand a reflection of their own suppressed grievances. His challenge was a public declaration that fairness could no longer be a casualty of bureaucratic rigidity. His words transcended the boundaries of a simple financial transaction, morphing into a potent symbol of resistance against policies that, under the guise of security, perpetuated discrimination. As the confrontation escalated, the power dynamics shifted dramatically. With every word, James dismantled the pretense of routine service, exposing the branch's underlying prejudice. The staff, initially confident in their ability to enforce arbitrary rules, now appeared rattled and uncertain. Even Mike, who had so confidently wielded the bank's policies as a shield against perceived threats, found himself grappling with the realization that his actions were being scrutinized not just by a customer, but by the owner of the institution itself. The moment James revealed his true identity, no longer just a patron but the CEO and owner of the bank, the air in the branch changed irrevocably. Shocked murmurs filled the space as the facade of impunity crumbled under the weight of undeniable authority. It was a turning point that signified the end of unchallenged discrimination and the beginning of a new era where accountability would be enforced at every level. James's demand was clear and uncompromising: an immediate processing of his transaction, a full audit of the branch's policies, and a reassessment of the staff's training and behavior. His directive went beyond punishing one individual. It was an assertion that no customer, regardless of background or appearance, should ever have to endure such treatment again. By invoking the authority of his position, he not only reclaimed his own dignity but also sent a resounding message to every employee in the branch that the era of unchecked prejudice was over. This confrontation was as much about reestablishing personal respect as it was about instituting broader changes that would ensure fairness and equality across the board. James's actions underscored the principle that true leadership involves not only the pursuit of profit but also the safeguarding of human dignity, a lesson that resonated deeply with all who witnessed the exchange. The public nature of the confrontation added another layer of urgency to the call for reform. In that crowded branch, every onlooker became a silent witness to the powerful assertion that policies must serve the people, not oppress them. As whispers and nods of agreement spread among the customers, it became evident that James had tapped into a collective desire for change, a desire that extended beyond one transaction to the very soul of the institution. In challenging Mike's demeaning behavior, James did more than demand his money. He demanded a commitment to fairness that would honor the experiences of countless others who had felt undervalued and ignored. His stand was a poignant reminder that respect must be the cornerstone of every interaction, and that leadership is measured not by one's ability to enforce rules, but by one's willingness to listen, empathize, and act decisively when those rules fail to uphold basic human decency. Ultimately, James Carter's confrontation at the bank was a seminal moment in the fight for equality and respect. It served as a catalyst for change, not only within that particular branch, but also across the entire organization. His unwavering demand for fairness transformed a routine banking encounter into an enduring lesson on the importance of accountability, human dignity, and the relentless pursuit of justice. In that moment, the bank was no longer a mere institution governed by cold regulations. It became a living, breathing community where every individual's worth was acknowledged, and where fairness was not just an ideal, but a practiced reality. In a moment that redefined the power dynamics of the branch, James Carter revealed his true identity, a revelation that not only stunned the room but also set an entirely new standard for how customers should be treated. Up until that point, the interactions had been laced with a simmering tension, a subtle, pervasive reminder that beneath the polished veneer of the institution lay deeply ingrained practices of prejudice and bureaucratic rigidity. James had entered the bank in plain clothes, purposefully shedding the trappings of corporate authority to experience firsthand the treatment meted out to ordinary customers. As he navigated the cold and different atmosphere of the branch, he observed a systematic disregard for customer dignity. This disregard became painfully apparent when he attempted to withdraw $5,000, only to be met with unnecessary delays, excessive scrutiny, and condescending interrogations by a staff member named Mike. However, it was at the apex of this unjust encounter that James chose to expose his true self, a calculated move that would shift the paradigm of accountability and fairness within the bank. With the eyes of a growing crowd of onlookers fixed upon him, James calmly declared his true identity, announcing that he was not merely an ordinary customer but the very owner of the institution. The revelation struck like a thunderclap, instantly transforming the atmosphere from one of simmering tension to palpable shock. Employees who had once carried out their duties with an air of unquestionable authority now found themselves stripped of any pretense of superiority. In that critical moment, James's identity served as a powerful equalizer, forcing everyone present to reckon with the reality that the bank's policies and practices were subject to scrutiny by someone who had experienced both the struggles of ordinary customers and the weight of executive responsibility. By unveiling his identity, James not only reclaimed his personal dignity but also underscored a fundamental principle that power should be wielded with compassion, fairness, and accountability. His declaration was not a mere assertion of authority, it was a clarion call for systemic change. He made it clear that the existing practices, which allowed for arbitrary discrimination and dehumanizing procedures, were unacceptable. His voice, resonant with both personal experience and professional acumen, declared that the bank's operations must now reflect a commitment to integrity and respect for every individual who walked through its doors. The customers in the branch, who had silently borne the brunt of these practices for far too long, found in James's words a validation of their own frustrations and a beacon of hope for change. James's insistence on accountability was further cemented by his immediate demands for corrective action. He instructed the regional manager to conduct a full-scale audit of the branch, meticulously reviewing every policy and procedure to ensure that they met the new standards of fairness he was determined to implement. This was not just about rectifying a single incident, it was a strategic move aimed at overhauling a system that had long tolerated disrespect and discrimination. In his eyes, the bank was more than a financial institution, it was a community that bore the responsibility of treating every customer with the dignity they deserved. His actions sent a clear message that any behavior deviating from this standard would not be tolerated. The impact of James's revelation was immediate and profound. The employees, once confident in their unchallenged authority, were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Mike, whose initial arrogance had epitomized the branch's problematic approach to customer service, now found himself facing not only the rebuke of a powerful CEO but also the collective judgment of the onlookers. The stunned silence that followed was a stark reminder that the institution's legacy of dehumanization was now under the spotlight, and the time for complacency was over. For many customers, witnessing the unveiling of James's identity was transformative. It validated their long-held grievances and sparked a collective realization that respect and fairness were not privileges to be earned, but rights that must be upheld without exception. Moreover, this bold act of revealing his identity was emblematic of James's broader vision for leadership, one that transcended traditional notions of authority. He demonstrated that true leadership involves engaging directly with the challenges faced by those you serve and being unafraid to expose uncomfortable truths for the sake of progress. By stepping into the role of both an executive and a customer, he bridged a gap that had long existed within the institution, effectively dismantling the barriers that had allowed inequitable practices to persist. His dual identity served as a living testament to the idea that the pursuit of success should never come at the expense of ethical conduct and human dignity. In the wake of this dramatic turn of events, a new standard was established at the bank. The incident became a catalyst for reform, inspiring both a reevaluation of internal policies and a renewed commitment to customer service excellence. James's uncompromising stance paved the way for a series of initiatives designed to foster a culture of respect, transparency, and inclusivity. Training programs were overhauled, emphasizing empathy and equitable treatment, and robust mechanisms for customer feedback were implemented to ensure that every voice could be heard. The branch, once marred by a legacy of indifference, was now embarking on a journey towards becoming a model of fairness and accountability. Ultimately, James Carter's revelation of his identity and his subsequent actions not only reasserted his personal authority but also set a transformative precedent for the entire organization. It was a defining moment that illustrated how power, when wielded with integrity and a commitment to justice, can serve as a force for profound positive change. Through his courageous act, James reminded everyone that leadership is not about imposing rules from above, but about creating an environment where every individual is treated with the respect and dignity they inherently deserve. His legacy, forged in that pivotal moment, continues to resonate as a powerful example of what it means to lead with both strength and compassion. The story of James Carter teaches us that true leadership and success are not measured solely by wealth or status, but by the values of integrity, empathy, and accountability. One key lesson is that every individual deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their background or appearance. When James, a successful CEO, chose to step away from his privileged position and experience life as an ordinary customer, he exposed hidden biases and unfair practices that can easily go unchecked in any system. This reminds us that it is important to continually challenge the status quo and to advocate for fairness in every aspect of our lives. For those of us who have seen many changes over the years, this story resonates as a call to use our experience and wisdom to stand up for what is right. The narrative also encourages us to look beyond appearances and to recognize the humanity in each person we encounter. By holding ourselves and those around us accountable, we contribute to creating communities where respect and dignity are not just ideals, but everyday realities. Even in the face of bureaucratic obstacles and ingrained prejudice, a calm and decisive voice of reason can make a significant difference. As we apply these lessons to our own lives, whether in our neighborhoods, workplaces, or families, we can foster an environment where empathy leads to positive change and every person is valued. This story ultimately serves as a timeless reminder that true power lies in our willingness to listen, understand, and act with unwavering commitment to fairness and justice.